right. Numbers chapter 6. I didn't move my bookmark. Lots of good stuff in here. So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when either a man or a woman consecrates an offering to take the vow of a Nazarite to separate himself to the Lord, he shall, ... So, Nazar, to dedicate, consecrate, separate. So if someone is taking the vow of a Nazarite, let's go down a little bit there. There we go. If someone's taking the vow of a Nazarite, well, that they're separating themselves unto the Lord, right? And so this is someone who wants to take a season, and that was what typically this vow was a season of consecration, a season of dedication, where for a season they would be just focusing in on serving the Lord and being separated unto the Lord. And so they would do these certain things during that season. There's only a few examples we have, Samuel, Samson, where, and perhaps John the Baptist, where people are Nazarites their whole lives. They spend their whole lives separate unto the Lord. And so it says, he shall separate himself from wine, from similar drink. He shall drink neither vinegar made from wine, nor vinegar made from similar drink. Neither shall he drink any grape juice, nor eat fresh grapes, or even raisins. So no raisins. Some lame oatmeal for a Nazarite. Now, here's the thing with wine, and you could kind of take this two directions because each of these prohibitions are symbolic, and you could kind of look at it from two different ways. One is wine is symbolic of joy, of earthly joy. Psalm 104, verse 15, it just talks about the joy of wine and celebration. And so this Nazarite, they're going to separate themselves from celebration. It's not that we can't have fun or have a good time, but there's a solemnness to this vow. They're not supposed to be caught up in the partying. In fact, it makes me think of in 2 Timothy chapter 2, where he talks about a soldier does not entangle himself in civilian affairs. And that's kind of the idea. Is like, well, no, I'm a soldier. I have to be focused on the battle. I need to be focused on the war. And so I'm not going to do all these things that civilians are doing. And that's the idea of if this is to represent abstaining from earthly joy. Yet on the other side of this, right, there are all warnings against drunkenness in the Bible. Proverbs 20, verse 1 and 31, verses 4 to 5, elsewhere, that... So here again, we have another example. So on one side of the spectrum, you could interpret the prohibition of wine to be, you're not going to be focused on joy because you're focusing on the Lord. You're not going to focus on partying. But on the other side, it's, here's something dangerous. Sure, a little bit might be okay and permissible, right? A glass of wine, that's permissible. But you're a Nazarite. You're not just everyone else. God wants to use you in a special way. So you should just not drink wine at all. In fact, because of this Nazarite vow being so extreme, you can't have vinegar, you can't have grapes, you can't even have raisins. In 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 22, the King James, Old King James, says to abstain from even the appearance of evil. Newer translations will say like all kinds of evil, and I think both are accurate. But the idea here is that when you recognize there's something bad, why mess around with it? Why play with fire? And so here the Nazarite, obviously no one's getting drunk off raisins. So, I mean, this is like very extreme. But that was also the purpose of this Nazarite vow, was taking things to an extreme. And once again, the Nazarite vow was typically only a season. When we see Paul cutting his hair in the book of Acts, as he's trying to get back to Jerusalem, leaving Corinth. So would that be like 1 Corinthians 18? Or Acts 18, I mean, where he's in Corinth? It doesn't say explicitly, but he may have taken a Nazarite vow. Paul, a Jewish man, it wouldn't surprise us that he would still do some of these traditions he had been raised on. And we'll get to the hair cutting, but the idea was that you would grow your hair the duration of the vow and then cut it off and offer all that hair up as an offering. Thus, the longer you do the vow, the more hair you have to offer. And so, again, though, that really speaks to the fact that this was not intended to be an ongoing thing. It was something that you did for a season. And so, again, if the wine and abstaining from wine was because of the dangers of drinking, well, then it just goes to show, yeah, that it's okay. You know, I mean, that's one of those things that maybe sometimes you need to hear. Oftentimes, you know, maybe people are trying to fight back against legalism, and, you know, they want someone to say, well, it's okay to drink a drink. And it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, the Bible doesn't prohibit you from drinking a drink. On the same side, I think sometimes people in the church need to hear, it's okay not to drink. It's okay to just avoid stuff. You're not a legalist if you personally don't want to watch rated R movies. If you personally don't want to get caught up in other things that other people feel like they have the liberty to do, it's that idea, like, that's okay too. It's okay to just want to distance yourself from stuff that you know could get you into trouble. And so with the Nazarite, that's the first thing that he is avoiding. All the days of his separation, he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine from seed to skin. So he's just saying, yeah, he avoids even the source of the wine. It's a pretty extreme vow. Now, 7 minutes, just seeing how we're doing here. All the days of the vow, verse 5, of his separation, no razor shall come upon his head until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself. He shall be holy. Then he shall let the locks of his head grow, and all the days he separates himself, Lord, he shall... Okay, that's next. And so the idea was that he would start the vow by shaving his head, which is a very attractive look, I hear. And then after that, let it grow. And during that time, he would not cut his hair at all. Now, I have some interesting references in my Bible, but of course, I think many people are familiar with 1 Corinthians 11:14, where Paul, using not a legalistic thing that we should be holding over people, but a general observation that men don't have long hair. Paul obviously never met a hippie. And Paul obviously was very familiar with Samson and Samuel and Nazarites. So it's not a legalistic thing we are to lay down, but he was trying to make a different point, that naturally men have men have short hair and women have long hair. That's very traditional. It doesn't mean women can't have shorter hair, and it doesn't mean men can't have long hair, right? The Bible's not trying to get on us about our haircuts, but I think we all are familiar with the very general trend we see. So that said, though, a man with long hair, he does stand out. So while, we're not supposed to let people know when we're fasting, nor let the right hand know what the left is doing, this idea, we're not supposed to be boastful about our works, but the Nazarite would stand out. The man who took a Nazarite vow, people would see it. And I'll just put it this way, that we are supposed to be different. We are supposed to be different than everyone else. And I would hope you don't have to do a special haircut, that people on the outside at least in time, observing your way of living, would notice that you're different. Very simple. The whole time of the Nazarite vow, the hair cutting served two purposes. One, it set him apart as different. It's very obvious. You might not notice if he drank wine or not. You might not notice the dead things that's coming up, but you'll notice the hair is different. Secondly, again, it actually, the longer you did the vow, the more hair you had to offer the Lord, which was kind of just a cool thing in the sense of just that it was something that, you had a tangible evidence of the season of faithfulness you've had. And then he shall not go near a dead body in verse 6. He shall not make himself unclean, even for his father or his mother, for his brother or sister, when they die, because of his separation to God, is on his head. And all the days of his separation shall be holy to the Lord. Now, it's going to go into some extra details here. But first off, now, he cannot touch anyone dead. Now, that just might seem silly. Like, okay, I mean, is that a big deal? I'm sure you guys probably would miss raisins. And, I actually don't fully know what the ladies do. Do the ladies have to shave their head bald too? It doesn't really specify. Maybe guys wouldn't like the long hair. I don't know, Steve, if you've ever had long hair down flowing past your shoulders. I could see it maybe. But the point is that this last one, you think, okay, touching dead things, but for his mother, for his father. So you can't come into the house. When a family member died, you wouldn't be able to go through the traditional Jewish mourning process. Why? Because you'd become defiled. And if you're defiled, you cannot offer any offerings. You cannot enter the tabernacle to do all those things. And so the idea here was, even at personal sacrifice, the Nazarite was to maintain his eligibility to serve, his eligibility to worship, his eligibility to sacrifice, even at great cost. Obviously, family is important to us, all cultures. I think, family is important. But to the Jews, again, the sitting Shiva and the way that they would mourn over the dead, that was a big part of their culture. But the Nazarite could not participate. Even something so near and dear, if he was dedicated to his Nazarite vow, he would have to even let these very important personal things sit second and to the side of his worship of the Lord. And that's a great lesson for us also. Are we willing to count the cost? Count the cost of following Jesus. Maybe there are some things, because God obviously does not put family on a low priority, right? God obviously does not want us to dismiss family values. I mean, that's the only reason family values exist is from the Bible, I would say. But there are probably other things in our lives that are maybe precious to us. And again, it's like, but what's more important? Not to pick on anyone in particular, I don't know who, but I know a lot of people who can't make it to church, got a birthday party. And it's like, well, there are 6 other days a week that we can have birthday parties. I just throw it out there. It's like, get your priorities right. I'm not saying you can never miss church for a family event. That's legalistic, but I also will say, doesn't hurt, Well, I didn't pick the day. It's my nephew, it's my whoever, and I need to go support them. And I said, well, that's fine. I'm assuming they're not doing it at 10 a.m. on a Sunday. Well, yeah, but they're doing it in the afternoon and the evening. Well, wouldn't it be just crazy if you were so bold to tell someone, hey, it's 4 o'clock. I'm here for the birthday party. And I know when a Mexican birthday party starts at 4, it doesn't start at 4 because I'm like the only white person who shows up and you're like, oh, 4 o'clock birthday. If you know, right? But, and you just tell them, yeah. And about at 5:45, I have to get going because we have to get to church. But the birthday's just getting started. Well, you chose to have a birthday on Sunday and that's the Lord's day. And as for me and my house, we go to church. So, just let them know that here, the Nazarite, family is important. But the Nazarite, no, the Lord's more important. And so they can't touch a dead body. They can't sit Shiva. They can't be a part of that process because their service to the Lord is more important. They cannot become defiled. And so for us, having those priorities, it's one of those things where, our kids know that we'll miss something to make it to the soccer playoffs or whatever. But at the same time, we won't sign up for a soccer season when it interferes with church. We've had to say no to activities they've done before in the past because we have our priorities. Like that's just it. Like, yeah, church comes first. Okay, is it okay if Judah comes late to the youth study for a few months? He'll be half an hour late. Yeah, well, okay, half an hour late, but he's still making it to youth. I get it's different when it's at our house, but that's the idea is, again, like we're thinking about this stuff, and Robert's jumping in. Yeah, it's like planning ahead and thinking about this and having our family priorities. Well, if we sign on for this, it might affect our church schedule. Well, what's more important? I know when Izzy Sandoval, Dallas's son, won the state championship in basketball last year, and also was like, an all-star, all-state, football player and all that. Dallas made the point to his son. It's like, you know what? You always wanted to do those extra leagues that the other kids were doing that would have met on Sundays all the time and interfere with church. And we said no. But God honored that, didn't he? Kid still went on to be a star player on the state championship basketball team and whatnot. It's because, God can take care of your kids' athletics. Birthday parties, if you can show up to part of it, show up and support that family, but now I'm just going to wrap up because basically it goes on to say that, if at any point the Nazarite breaks this vow, it goes into the sacrifices and the things that he does. And so it talks about what he would bring and that he takes his hair and puts it on the fire. That's in verse 18. I just kind of want to wrap up the Nazarite section because we've gone too long already. And I don't want to just go over the sacrifices tomorrow. And so once again, if anything happens, he would have to shave his head and start over. So that's kind of what it's talking about down in 9 to 12. How if something happens, it's like, yeah, you got to start over. But you know what? He can start over. That's what we do. And you know what? If you've gotten off track and you haven't been living separated unto the Lord, you haven't been living the way you used to live, you have not been faithful to the church, these kinds of things, it's the idea that start over, right? It's just like, go back and start over. It's okay. Get a fresh start. And that's kind of what the Nazarite's being told. It's like, yeah, it's if his vow got ruined, well, that's fine. Well, you just start over again. It's okay. Like, just get back on the horse and keep on riding, right? And so again, it goes through more of the details of the sacrifices and stuff for a Nazarite, and the offering of the hair, which we were talking about earlier in verse 18. And then, yeah, it just kind of goes and wraps it up again. Once it's all done, he can go back to the way things were, before he was doing his Nazarite vow. So there you go. And Michelle is asking, was Samson a Nazarite? So yes, right? That's the idea. Samson was a Nazarite. Samuel was a Nazarite. And those guys, again, were for life. So if you jumped in a little late, we mentioned like Samson, Samuel, John the Baptist, possibly, right? These are guys who are Nazarites for life, but that was very rare. And so that the common thing, I'm going to wrap up, repeat for some people, but then we'll bring this to a close, maybe under 20 minutes, is where you talk about offering the hair up in verse 18, number 6:18, that was what it was, is the typical person would shave their head and be extremely attractive when they do so. And then their hair would grow for the duration of the vow. So typically people only did it for a matter of weeks, months. It all depended. I said, I think it's very likely Paul did a Nazarite vow in Acts 18 when he was in Corinth and he cuts his hair and wants to get back to Jerusalem so he can offer it up. But the point is that it was a short-term thing. Some people did it for life. But like as we went through today, and if you missed it, guys, go back to the beginning and pick it up. the three main things of the Nazarite vow, abstaining from wine, shaving your head, and not touching a dead body, there's some beautiful applications for the Christian, right? Just how these things represent something and what those things represent, that applies to us. I mean, just understanding that being separate is something we can choose to do, and making these tough choices to live holy and consecrated to the Lord. So, all right, there you guys go. God bless you guys. And we'll be back on tomorrow to get the Aaronic blessing. That'll be fun. So you guys take care, and I will see you then.